All right. You guys can all hear me. Amazing. Thanks for everyone being here. This is our final panel. It's a treat to be here with Lucas and Jarren for the Dorm Room to Defense panel. Let's just start with some brief introductions. So Lucas here is the co-founder and CEO of Combinator-backed, a Y Combinator-backed company providing passive radio frequency-based drone detection systems. He started his company in the spring of 2024 and going full-time with Guardian in the summer. And then we have Jarren, who's the co-founder and CEO of Usul, also a Y Combinator-backed company, building an AI platform for defense contract capture. Also started Usul back in spring of 24 as part of the Hacking for Defense course at Stanford. I guess just to start us off, it'd be great to just learn a little bit more about the founding stories. You guys were both student founders, so what led you guys to start Usul and Guardian? And then I guess more specifically, why build a company in defense?
Well, I had two classmates here at Georgetown. We were in the physics department. We had been doing a lot of research in signal processing. Actually, first of all, I want to thank everyone for putting this together. Let me not get ahead of myself. I know it took a lot of effort, and thank you everyone for coming out today. Really touched to be invited. Anyway, I was with two of my classmates, John and Eli, and their whole background was in signal processing, primarily from a biophysics perspective, so cardiograms, brain waves, and we're working with a lot of really antiquated computers. Our physics department isn't always the best funded here, but we basically wound up getting invited to a defense technology hackathon that was actually organized by 3 other Georgetown students. And it was judged by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. We wound up showing our software there basically as a way to classify and localize drone signatures, so the communications between a drone and its controller or video monitor in contested, heavily saturated electronic warfare environments. And so that turned out to be a win. We really wanted to pursue this full time because we found a really strong sense of urgency around the problem set. Hey, drones, counter-drone warfare is something that's going to be solved within the next, at the time, 3 years, now maybe, year and a half, 2 years conservatively. And it wound up being defense because, that's really where the need for aerospace awareness was most acute, and where we could most rapidly validate our technology. Now we're looking at a whole, much broader section of verticals, including public safety, law enforcement, critical infrastructure protection, and aviation services.
Cool. Hey guys, I'm Jarren. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Usul. Usul is an AI platform that a bunch of companies around the world use to sell to the government. So, for example, if you're a drone company, you can throw the tech specs of the drone you build in our platform, and then we use AI agents to go find government contracts for you across the US, NATO, and abroad. I actually grew up in Northern Virginia, so I grew up in the Beltway, and my dad was at Northrop for 20 years, and so I grew up watching him use old, archaic government software in our living room every day, and he'd always complain about it. And so I figured, hey, maybe I could code something to make my dad's life a little easier. And then I dropped out of high school for the first company I did. I went to Stanford and met my co-founder, Oliver, who's right there. And we were freshman year roommates, and now we're still stuck together. And then we worked at Palantir a little bit and then dropped out of Stanford after our sophomore year to start Usul. And we joined the same YC batch as Lucas and Guardian RF, and it's been a crazy year. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. I think it'd be great to learn a little bit more. Obviously, starting a company in college, a lot of risk. Was there a moment that you guys realized, obviously for you, Lucas, it was the hackathon that got you guys to start, Jarren, Hacking for Defense, a moment where you guys realized, oh shit, we have a company, this isn't just an idea or a fun class project, and kind of talk us through a little bit of what that kind of thought process was like.
Yeah, I think the fundamental difference between a class project and a company is that in a class project, your job is to outreach to people hey, I'm a student doing a research project, and they get on the phone with you and you ask them questions, and then you try to prove some hypothesis you have for your professor, and then you iterate every week, right, and make a presentation on it, right? What we realized, or what we were tasked with in Hacking for Defense, which is Stanford's Defense Tech Accelerator class, we were tasked with integrating AI in the DoD. right? That is the most broad problem statement you could ever be tasked with in a class project. And so over the course of 10 weeks, we interviewed 200 people across the Pentagon, across a bunch of defense companies, and just asked them very open-ended questions around like, hey, like what are the biggest problems you face every day that maybe AI could supplement? And then naturally, they all complained about this procurement process, or the process of like a company selling to the government or the government buying from companies. And we realized during this class that government software like was actually a unique case for AI in that for the last 20 years, software hasn't really changed. And what was new and sexy in government software was like command Fing and keyword searching around databases that haven't really changed. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has watched War Dogs or heard of War Dogs. And there's a very famous scene in War Dogs where Jonah Hill is like searching on a very old computer on a black and green website for a government contract. And that website still exists. It's called Dibs, and people still use it every day, right? And so we thought like, hey, maybe if we could use AI to aggregate all these portals in one place, we could build a big business. And then fast forward, then now we're actually building a company out of it.
It's funny you mentioned Dibs, because I was going to work, before the company took off, I was going to work at the Defense Logistics Agency, which maintains that website. And it's like the biggest shit show ever. But, for us, we really had the hackathon win. Obviously, the hackathon itself was a huge success. Nate Salander, Rasmus De Meyer, and Tommy Tejan did a great job of putting that together. I think that was a huge win for Georgetown, tens of millions of impressions on X. But that was really only the start for us. It was a brutal semester after that because we were still in school. So I remember I made a remark to a friend to the extent that, hey, junior fall, I did my best in academics. I put up my best GPA. Junior spring, I basically failed like 3/4 of my classes, like not really, but it was kind of at that level. And obviously, for the Ukrainians, there's a very strong culture in Europe of extreme diligence on investments. And that worked out for us because by the time we were ready to take a step away from school, head to Ukraine full time, we had already been very, rigorously tested and, basically gotten almost like, gotten a lot of all the early pushback that we needed, I would say. And so ultimately where it wound up is when we first saw the first use case of our product that ended in mitigation of a drone or saving someone's life, that's how we knew we had a company. Because if you can detect, track, identify, that's great, but it has to lead to something. And the first time we saw we could clearly do this much better than the incumbent field of solutions, we decided it was worthwhile to pursue.
Awesome. I think it'd be great to go back to, I guess, YC, summer of 2024. I'm really curious, obviously an incredible experience, but how did that experience really shape the trajectory of your companies? I think it's awesome you guys came from very different journeys, but you ended up in the same batch at the same time. And what were some of the biggest lessons that I guess came out of that accelerator?
I'll answer very quick, and then I'll let Jarren do most of the talking. I was in Ukraine for the full duration of our batch. So it was very trying experience. Me in Ukraine, John and Eli in SF, it was like a 9-hour time difference. Some instances where I just really needed them to, wake up and like turn on the tech, like, hey, we're having some bugs right now, like get up. I know it's 3 a.m. But I think it forced me to think very consciously about translating both the technology I was developing as well as the lessons that were being learned in Ukraine to America, which is ultimately our biggest market. I think a lot of people in this space feel like America is the biggest client, and being and having a routine cadence with our American investors and the amazing program at Y Combinator really kept that front of center. It's been a big part of our latest push for Homeland Defense, and I've been super fired up and excited by a lot of the steps that YC has taken over the last few batches to really build a home for defense and hard tech companies in their program.
Yeah, it's funny. Like Lucas and I were in the same, not only in the same YC batch, but also the same section. So like for those who don't know, like YC is broken up into 4 groups of companies. And then within those groups, there's sections of companies that you really spend your whole batch with, right? So they're normally around like 10 or so. And our 10 company section was mainly around defense and government. Because Lucas was in Ukraine, it's actually our first time meeting face to face, even though like I know his co-founders pretty well. And so I would say, so because YC is structured like that, right? Like it's very intimate with the 10 companies you spend your time with. And what the partners make you do every week is they make the 10 founders, or the founders of the 10 companies, sit in a small room like the size of this floor, and they put a projector up like right here, and they say, all right, everyone, like what are your goals for next week, right? And those goals are normally attributed to like revenue growth or like technical milestones that are very ambitious, like that feel very uncomfortable, right? And then the next week, you come back in the same room with all the founders again, and the partners project your goals from last week up, and they say, all right, who hit them and who didn't? And they mark them red and green, right? So after like 3 weeks, if you hit red 3 times, it feels really bad, especially if like everyone around you is in the green. And so like that pressure kind of readjusts your local maximum for what you achieve or what you expect of yourself and your company. And so for us, like YC was kind of a pressure cooker, especially because we dropped out after our sophomore year of college. Like I'm sure a bunch of you guys are around the age that we were as well. Yeah. And so it kind of had to change what was reality for us at the time, and that was the biggest benefit we had. So we still keep those operating principles today in our company in regards to like the very ambitious goals we set and the speed at which we move to hit them. And then last thing is, because of that like, intimate hazing that happens, you become really close with the other founders. So now like some of our best founder friends are ones from our YC batch. So.
Incredible. Obviously, you guys both started out in defense. There's dual use aspects for both your companies in some ways, I guess. But you're still fundamentally, when you're dealing with defense, competing against companies, founded or, have people that are 4-star generals, PhD scientists, just a lot of experience, right? What have been, I guess, some of the advantages to being a young founder in this space? And then also, I guess, on the flip side, what have been some of the disadvantages that you guys have kind of addressed and had to work around?
Yeah. In the early days, it was really hard. Like no one took us seriously whatsoever. And also like candidly, we didn't really know what we were talking about either. So like they could tell when we walked up and started asking them questions, like we had no idea what we were talking about. Fast forward now, and also for context, like we've been around for just over a year. So now we have a bunch of like Fortune 500 companies using our software. And I would like to consider like myself an expert in government contracting. And so now that they think we know what we're talking about, it's amazing. Like it's actually the best free marketing for us. So like you can imagine like any defense conference or government conference that I'm sure a lot of you have been to, the average age is a lot older than me, and people look a lot different than me. And so we run around the conferences in Usul t-shirts, and people will naturally just look at us like, who are these kids running around, right? And then they'll walk up to us and be like, oh, what's Usul? Because they're all wearing t-shirts that say Usul on it. So it's the freest marketing we have. Also, young people are viewed by older generations as like technical evangelists, and that like if you are an AI expert, you are perceived as one if you're the youngest in the room. So for us, it's actually very, very good. And so most offices we go to, whether that be a big defense prime or a government office or a consulting firm, they look at us by nature as the AI expert just because we're so much younger than them. So it's actually super hard for us.
I think Jarren hit the nail right on the head. There's never been a better time to be a young guy in defense. I would say, obviously it's incredibly daunting, but there's an advantage in there, especially when you're working at a startup. You're trying to push technology that is in itself breaking from the norm, that there's a bit of a gating or filtering process that happens when you reach out to people or when you look to open that conversation at a conference. People will really filter themselves out. And it saves a lot of your time as a founder if you understand that. Don't take it personally when someone doesn't want to talk to you. But with the artificial intelligence tools and a lot of the resources us Georgetown students have, it's really well within your grasp to be able to play catch up, and you could probably join, maybe Jarren and the 5 other people under 30 who understand how government contracting works. The flip side being, I think that a lot of people, be they in academia, on the investment side, or in private industry, will try and take advantage of you. And the first couple of times that happens, it's super demoralizing. But you kind of get used to it, and the more traction you pick up and the more experience you get, the less of a problem that turns out to be.
Yeah. Actually, just quick follow-up there. I'm curious, hiring. I feel like startups always say, and just in general, people say the hardest part of building a company is hiring, right? for you guys are obviously not only young founders, but young teams, right? So how have you thought about building your teams, but also when you're hiring, how do you convince people, right, who are maybe choosing between, people that were here today, your Palantirs, your Andurils, to join Usul or join Guardian?
You're never going to compete in terms of compensation. I think the pitch is always like, hey, this is the only company where you're going to be able to work on this problem. Eli is our oldest employee. He's 24 years old. We call him Unk. But we love working with young people. Usually we'll reach out to specific schools, specific programs if like, hey, we need someone who's really great at signal processing. We need a great mechanical engineer to fix XYZ problem. We work with a lot of Georgetown students. Half this crowd has probably been my intern at one point or another. But we like to keep it young, and there's room to work in some of that older experience through a advisory capacity or on a limited scope for specific engagements. We've gotten, I think, really great guidance on how to manage that process from Y Combinator, and there's a ton of people who are experienced with this sort of thing that will either love to engage with you formally on some sort of advisory board structure, or maybe are just a friend of a friend. I think we have countless of what I call like informal advisors, mentors at Gartner F that certainly where we are today would not have been possible without them, and some of those people I met during my times in undergrad.
Yeah, I would echo everything Lucas said. I think it's our job as a founder to make people excited about the work they do and the mission we have. I also think that very large generational companies are built by people with fresh perspectives. And so at scale, it takes some sort of like amalgamation of young people or people who haven't traditionally been in government and defense to question why things are the way they are to build a really big business. So,
awesome. Lucas, obviously you mentioned already you spent 6 months in Ukraine testing out obviously the product with the front lines. Now you're back in the US protecting high-risk events and critical infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies. I'm curious, what did you really learn from your time in Ukraine, and how did that really kind of influence Guardian's journey based on the feedback and those experiences out there?
We really started Guardian RF from the MVP, the minimum viable product, and I think that's part of a much broader wave of companies in our space that are starting to think this way. Whereas historically DOW requirements have been more of a top-down dictated process with some insulation between those people with the funds and the end user. What we really found in Ukraine was they basically they're called the warehouses of shame. And it's where a lot of the big bulky ISR, like sensors, radars, big autonomous drones that cost $1 million get sent and get cannibalized for parts. And what we saw, the real sort of experts and users using were really scaled down, really minimalistic analog radios where you'd have maybe one electronic warfare expert who'd have a laptop, a software-defined radio, and an antenna. And he was, physically looking at these spectrograms. It's a visual representation of RF data. And he was trying to basically guess one drone from another. They would screenshot these, like waves, and put them in a Google Doc, that being the signature library. And immediately, I think we saw the parallels to our prior research. We got a really good initial grounding in the reality of what our product enables. I feel like there's a huge disconnect on both the founder and the VC side that, at least in the defense industry, people are making products either to kill people or to keep soldiers alive longer so they don't get killed. And there's a really intense gratitude and care we need to put into every single one of our products to make sure it does not fail at that moment. But the last and I think biggest thing in terms of the direction of our company has been an emphasis on economies of scale. We have to be able to detect, track, and disrupt drone threats within cost parity of the drones themselves. Drones are incredibly easy to use, and they're very cheap. And so we wanted to build the inverse of that for the counter drone side, and especially when we're working with municipal police departments, private industry that may not even have counter drone stuff on their top 200 priorities, being able to come in with an incredibly lightweight kit and structure our platform the way we do, which is a subscription-based model, has really opened up a lot of verticals in search and rescue, aeromedical, executive protection, things that have never even considered the use of counter drone equipment before, because again, that industry is so dominated by these larger solutions, these radars and such.
I feel like that really speaks to I guess the importance of obviously getting the experience and not just thinking that you're building something that's going to work, but actually going out there and saying is this going to break? Is this useful? And how do we actually improve this? Jarren, obviously you've seen hundreds of companies try to win and bid for DoD contracts. Year to date, I feel like you've helped clients secure over $1 billion in contracts. What's some of the patterns that you've seen between companies that win those contracts and those that lose? I guess, what do founders kind of miss in some ways when trying to sell to the government?
I think I'd preface all this with saying in an ideal world, the best product will always win, which is how it kind of works in commercial with the government. Doesn't necessarily work that way. Hopefully in the future it will. I think the most common trend I see across some of the best companies we work with are we actively encourage them to forget everything they've ever thought about selling to the US government or NATO governments at large. And the reason for that is the software that these people have been used to using for all aspects of their business, which are finding government contracts, writing government proposals, tracking stakeholders, navigating federal budgets, any sort of workflow, have all been segmented for the past 20 years and haven't changed. And a lot of these people's careers at these big defense companies has been built on using antiquated software, right? So on day one, we pretty much try to convince them to forget everything they've ever done, which is very hard. So when we go in and pitch ourselves, we kind of pitch ourselves instead of being hey, we're a software platform you can use to do X, Y, and Z. We pitch ourselves as, hey, we're your collaborative AI partner to be more innovative and be do the best work you possibly can, because this is a very relationship-based industry. And at the end of the day, our AI agents aren't going to replace someone's relationships they may have in the Pentagon, but we can augment them, right? And so for us specifically, the best companies you work with are people who kind of forget how they've traditionally done work with the government. Also, the government's changing, right? And they're willing to take that bet to step into the future and leverage AI in their work and not manually jam data into systems all day and let us automatically handle that for them. So, yeah.
Let's get into some of my favorite questions. I think I'd love to start off with where you guys decided to base your companies. I think nowadays, obviously, particularly for industries that I guess are mission aligned, you're seeing certain hubs obviously line up. People know San Francisco primarily for the kind of frontier of AI, and obviously New York tends to attract top fintech companies. Why did you guys choose to, I guess, base your company? Jarren, you're obviously in SF.
Yep.
Lucas, you're here. Talk us through that decision. Do you think that's an important decision, and why?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So I think the fundamental, the sub question to this question is as a founder, and we're gonna have very different answers on this. Are you building a defense company, or are you building a technology company, right? And for us at Usul, we're definitely building the latter. We're building a pure technology company. And to walk you through what our goal is, I want to build Amazon for the government. So imagine a world where any company across any allied nation can use software to sell to the governments in 3 clicks on their computer, right? And not just in defense, because we started in defense, but also any industries. I think construction, healthcare, a camera on a stoplight, literally anything we can facilitate through our platform. And so because of that, we consider ourselves a technology company. So I have a very strong opinion that, mind you, I grew up in DC, but I think amazing technology companies over time have all been built in San Francisco and not DC, which is why we're based in San Francisco. That being said, I am in DC every 2 weeks, which is very difficult. So we will have a commercial hub here soon, but that's why we're based in San Francisco. So we're I would say at a core, we're a pure technology company who does a lot of national security work, but at scale, we want to be across multiple industries. So
I think that sort of maps on the opposite of how we feel, which is, of course, we have a drone detector. It's enabled by technology. There's really that category of product that we sell. And And then there's the other aspects of drone detection as a service, which are, even in instances where, let's say it's MetLife Stadium, an ideally hardened target and the easiest drone in the world to detect, there's very, unclear guidance for local responders in terms of what they can and can't do, who's responsible for responding to that incident, as well as, in terms of these very, literally and figuratively low altitude events that are fleeting. A drone will be up, 1 second, 2 minutes, it's gone. There's essentially zero framework to plug this into any sort of regional or national airspace picture. So when I think about where my company's headed and the value that we provide to a lot of our stakeholders, it's honestly in opening up a lot of these conversations and being sort of a middleman between our direct fielded end users and the US government, federal agencies that are shaping the policy and appropriations around this issue, and ultimately heading toward being, almost like an air traffic control layer for drone activity, both, potentially malicious or suspicious, but also helping to peacefully integrate, let's say when Amazon has thousands of drones going through every major city, making sure that that is done in a manner that makes sense and integrates well into populated areas, and that's very much a policy thing for us to tackle.
Let's talk about school. We're here at Georgetown. Both of you guys obviously dropped out. Lucas here at Georgetown, Jarren, you at Stanford. I'm really curious, what do you feel like was helpful that you learned in your respective universities in building your companies or for the future you wanted to create for yourself and the world? And also on the flip side, what do you think was actually either not helpful or just neutral that you would kind of want to highlight? Obviously, students in the audience who want to maybe build companies in the future, who are in school, and obviously we're in another interesting technological moment, so curious thoughts there.
Definitely the student body. Georgetown represents basically the accumulation of a lot of really, really bright people, and although you guys don't think you have technical talent, I promise you do. It was 3 Georgetown students who set up this hackathon, where I ultimately met some of my first investors and some of my first end users. And I think that Georgetown really thrives in setting up and creating these machines to get students well placed into particular industries. We have a great machine around finance. Similarly, we do a lot of consulting recruiting. It's institutionalized with the school. And I think we're seeing the beginning stages of that with defense and national security work. And I want to encourage it by any and all means. I think that this is our forte. I think our alums basically run almost every single office of the federal government that matters. And we have a lot of students, particularly in our STEM fields, that aren't being as mobilized into this as I believe they can be. I think that, that model of thinking of incentivizing Georgetown student behavior as students will do something cool because we make the initial steps easy, needs to prevail over another model of Georgetown student behavior, which is, Georgetown students will do this because it's prestigious. And I think all the, products, student clubs that may come up downstream of that line of thinking ultimately don't really go anywhere, maybe collapse down into consulting rather than genuine entrepreneurship. And we have to be incredibly cautious about leading with the impact and trying to bring as many end users and qualified customers here to meet our student body as we can.
Yeah, I think the best part about Stanford is that Stanford and Silicon Valley as a whole encourage you to pursue really big ideas that will probably piss off a lot of people or disrupt a lot of industries, which the Northern Virginia public school system didn't necessarily encourage me to do. That being said, I think most startup classes at colleges, especially elite colleges like Georgetown or Stanford or Ivy Leagues at scale, kind of optimize for the wrong things. I imagine that most of you guys have taken some sort of innovation startup based class at Stanford, and there's probably professors in here as well. But Most of those classes are optimized to do research on a problem, like build a solution, and then do a presentation at the end of the class, which you present to a professor or an audience like this, right? AKA, they're optimized for you to build a pitch deck, right? And so at Stanford specifically, in most schools, what that does is it creates a behavior of like, okay, I'm a student, I want to start a company. Step one is make a pitch deck, which is not right whatsoever. And at Stanford, it's extremely bad because every professor is an investor, right? So whether you like it or not, your class project is always an investor pitch. In reality, like, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this after the fact. In the moment I was taking these classes, I didn't know. In reality, like, none of that actually matters, right? The only thing that matters, if any of you guys actually want to start a company, is to just like build a product. If you don't want to build a product, like find someone who can and work with them, and then figure out someone who wants to buy the thing. And if they won't buy it now, iterate until they will, right? Then maybe you can put it in a pitch deck, and then maybe someone will invest. But in step one, it shouldn't be that. So that was like the biggest downside for me.
I guess a follow-up there I'm curious is, I mean, Lucas used the word machine. I feel like, especially at Georgetown, we tend to value a lot this idea of a liberal arts education, kind of developing the whole person and taking these diverse classes. On the flip side, though, what it might take away is kind of being able to specialize on something, and often to create a solution or something that is actually going to make an impact takes a lot of work and specialization. So I'm curious for you guys, when you think about education and students who are maybe starting their journey at universities, how do you think about like the breadth of like wanting to, not just zone in on one subject, but, pursue your curiosity, and at the same time also kind of given how good, I guess, AI tools are getting and just in general, how do you balance that with also becoming specialized on something? Yeah.
Now this is an interesting one because a lot of famous venture capitalists also have very differing opinions on this, right? It's like they used to say like founders should have like one solo spike, and that spike should be like in their company's interest, right? And then now they're starting to say like the best founders will have generalized knowledge across the most amount of categories, and AI is making that easier. I think in general, like there's no correct way to do this. I think I'm also a bad edge case because I never took school that seriously. Like I enjoyed learning, like I'm naturally curious, but I never like excelled that best in the structure of a classroom. So I would encourage you to explore as many, if you're in a liberal arts school like Stanford or Georgetown, explore as many topics as you can that you naturally find curious, that you're willing to stay up really late at night, wake up really early in the morning, go like 18 hours a day studying on something, and then maybe you might find something of value that you can pursue in the world out of that topic. That's what running a company is like. It's just 18 hours a day trying to solve and research problems, just like a class.
Georgetown's a school of generalists. It's always been the part of the Jesuit mindset that you should try and have some proficiency across several fields. And I think that's inherently why defense technology is so attractive to us, or me. That hackathon I won, there were engineers there from UCLA, Berkeley, MIT, and they were building all sorts of crazy stuff, these robots, and some guy was doing some crazy stuff with photonics. We won because we built something people wanted, and we took the time to engage with our ecosystem. I just think that you get so far, maybe you don't max up your physics degree all the way to a PhD, but what I learned in 3 years as an undergraduate, taking that out and messing around with it a little in the real world, starting to talk to my friends who've been tracking what's going on in Ukraine, tracking what's going on in China, really yielded huge results. And I think that AI is really only going to fit generalists better, because anything that you're missing, if there's something that's $20 a month and you could be 90% sure that what it says is correct, even if it's 60% sure, that's statistically really awesome. That's going to put you in a much, much better space than anyone else has been. And we have the infrastructure here at Georgetown. We have an insane alumni base. We have so many people who are willing to help young Georgetown students. And when I look at the absolute funding frenzy that we're in right now in defense venture capital, VCs, anything that you throw dual use hard tech on, they can't give you money fast enough. I absolutely think that Georgetown should be wiping the floor with all these other schools. And I think there's a ton of potential here. And I'm really, really sort of excited to see a lot of the sort of grassroots enthusiasm and initiatives that have popped up at the school over the last few months.
Awesome. 2 more questions. Quick fire in a way. It's 5 years from now, right? We're talking. Where do you guys see Guardian and Usul? What is the vision? Where do you guys want to be?
So I think for Guardian, obviously we could measure this in terms of just a raw revenue number or this much headcount. I think for us and the picture I have in my mind, it kind of alludes to my earlier answer, which is I want the proportion of our revenue. Right now, most of our revenue comes from DoW. 5 years from now, I would assume the overwhelming majority comes from tracking, detecting, and attributing compliant UAS activity, commercial drone activity. Maybe we're feeding into some sort of UTM, drone traffic control system, from a commerce perspective or supporting the FAA. This is really going to be an insanely huge industry when you think about the logistics gains in using drone delivery over conventional modes. And there's going to be just so much work to do to make sure that happens safely. Just a few weeks ago, we do full coverage of Waco, Texas. And there was an Amazon drone that blew into a power line or something, cut off internet for like half the city. And that coincided with some other news events. Obviously a lot of the drone attention right now, if you go on LinkedIn, people are talking about fiber optic drones, autonomous drones. I think that's all great, but I think that someone's got to move on this much larger market opportunity, and I'm really proud of the early steps our team has made to realize that and call attention to a lot of the success and a lot of the traction that is yet to be done.
Yeah, I think to paint a picture of what Usul looks like in 5 years, I'd give you guys some context of what we look like right now. So we're 10 people in San Francisco that kind of all work in like the same room, pretty much like 7 days a week for 14 hours a day on average, with like 100 fires to put out. And I think we have product market fit. We're still assessing that, but I think we do. And it kind of sucks because there's a million things to do all the time, but it's really crazy. And I think our priorities over the next 5 years will change. Instead of building something that people want and figuring that out like we've been doing, to finding company market fit and building the company that's made for the industry we're working in. As in our goal, like I mentioned before, is to build Amazon for the government across every allied nation. So that requires not just having a hub in San Francisco, but being globally distributed where our customers are, right? And I would love if at some point we become the de facto platform that governments go to source technology to buy. Defense is the first industry we're in. We'll be in healthcare as well and construction. That's where I envision our company being in the next 5 years.
Awesome. Well, I think it's only right to end with this final question. There's students in the audience, obviously, who are thinking about maybe starting a company, wanting to work or work at startups. Kind of, what is your one piece of advice to everyone who's trying to figure out what that route would look like and what they can do to kind of make that happen?
I can start this one. So I believe that most enterprise AI value creation will consolidate in the next 5 years to be safe, 3 years to be aggressive. And so because of that, right now is the best time to do this. You also have the most leverage as a student. However, it's the easiest to talk to potential customers and get customers for whatever product you want to build right now, because when you have a Georgetown EDU email, everyone responds to you. Because they're like, this is someone who's trying to do research for a class project, of course I'm going to talk to them. And then as soon as they figure out you're a founder trying to sell them something, they ghost you. So right now is the best time to talk to them. This also happened to us, when we were in Hacking for Defense. All of those 200 people we talked to them all the time, and they loved us. And then as soon as they were hit with a Stripe link or a paywall on our product, their reactions are a lot different. So now is the best time to do it.
I think it would be twofold, but honestly, I think these two go hand in hand. The first would be build something you would want to use, because there's going to be a lot of months on end where you're just sitting in an office by yourself. And what keeps you going through those early roadblocks, and it's going to be a down period, and now the deeper into it you get, the less severe those become, the more sparse, is a genuine love for your product and what you're doing. I think what drives people into entrepreneurship in a lot of cases is they don't really see themselves as having other options. I mean, this is the only way I can really do what I love. And it's very hard to convince Georgetown students or schools at any, students at any sort of elite school for that matter, to say like, hey, take a step back, because it will come at the expense of your grades. It will come at the expense of your recruiting process. But the only thing I could say to that is, who cares? AI is going to do its thing anyway. I think you can just not let it compromise your youth. You're only 20, 21, 22 once. You have to have fun. You have to be maybe not going out if that's not your thing. But if you are thinking of yourself in terms, or thinking of yourself as a founder, in terms of someone who is building to a future value, and you're defining that solely in terms of financial terms, I think you're going to wind up comparing yourself to a lot of other people who share that same label, and ultimately don't have that much in common with you or what you're building. Just to go back to your earlier question, part of the reason we're in DC is because, I think we wanted to be able to kind of work on our own identity, separate from a lot of the, incredible work, incredible ecosystem that exists in El Segundo. You're starting to see a lot of defense in SF, and there's no limit on where you can start. DC is a great city, so I'd encourage everyone to get after it.
Awesome. Well, Lucas, Jarren, it's been a pleasure.